It is. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's right at 9 o'clock. I'm just going to share the, I'm just going to share some housekeeping slides real quick. Well, I'll start with so on the FDA campus, GSA is conducting baseline water tests throughout the campus. So if you see any signage posted at the designated water fixtures or areas, please do not use the water there. If there is not a sign, then it is safe to use. So we just ask that you refrain from consuming the tap water, and there is bottled water available out in the lobby area. Need to go back. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry. So for in-person attendees, we do have food and beverage available at the kiosk right outside. The kiosk will be open during the breaks and lunch. Items for purchase include coffee, tea, snacks, sandwiches, and salads. Lunch can be eaten within this room, any tables in the main hallway, or outside. The bathrooms are located just behind the kiosk, and any phone calls should be taken in the main hall. For virtual speakers, only the speakers with personalized links that have been sent out previously will be able to unmute, turn on cameras, and speak during the panel sessions. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box if you're virtual. And in person, there are microphones standing that you can go up to. Just make sure that you turn it on. And that is it. We will share the agenda.
Thank you, Brittany, and good morning. I'm Nushin Todd, the Director of the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 1 at the FDA. And on behalf of the organizers of this workshop in the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 1, the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health at the FDA, and as well as the University of Maryland CERSI program, I extend a warm welcome and thank you for attending today's conference on non-prescription pain and fever drug development in children 2 to 12 years of age. The purpose of this workshop is twofold. First is to determine whether there is an unmet need for additional drugs for pain and fever in children in the 2 to 12-year age group. And secondly, would there be safety concerns with introducing additional pain and fever medications into the market that would be different in their characteristics and what's currently available for this age group? And if there are safety concerns, how can we address these concerns in a pre-market setting rather than seeing the effects and the issues post-marketing? So to address these issues, we've invited subject matter experts from across the country and Canada to give their perspectives. This dynamic group of experts include academicians, pharmacists, consumer representatives, pediatricians, industry, and public health professionals. So you have the agenda provided when you registered for the program, and you can see it on screen now. And I'd like to just take a moment to give high-level overview of the agenda for today's workshop. We'll start by providing regulatory considerations for non-prescription pain and fever drugs with special emphasis on pediatric regulations. After all, it's not an FDA workshop without our regulations, right? So, but the rest of the workshop has been organized into 2 sessions. Each session will begin with a series of short presentations, followed by a short break, and then by a 1-hour panel discussion. We'll have the focus of the first session is to determine whether there's a need for additional non-prescription pain and fever medications in children. We'll take a break for lunch at about 12:15 and resume at 1 o'clock with the second session. And the second session will focus on discussing potential safety concerns with introducing additional pain and fever products into the market that would be different in their characteristics than what's currently available for this age group. We're looking forward to a very robust discussion of these issues, and we'll conclude with our summary and comments and steps forward presented by our Dr. Lin Yao at the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health. So now I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Michele, Director of the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs, to provide introductory remarks and to open the workshop. Thank you. Dr. Michele.
Well, thank you, Dr. Todd, for that nice introduction. And I'd also like to welcome everyone this morning from the Office of Non-Prescription Drugs and CEDAR, and thank everyone for joining us today, both in person and virtually, on this workshop on pediatric analgesics. So I'd especially like to thank all of our panelists and speakers who are donating their time today to help inform drug development in this important space. Also, thank you to the many, many FDA staff who worked very hard for this workshop, as well as our colleagues in the University of Maryland. So the Pediatric Research Equity Act, or PREA, was put in place back in 2003, and it gives FDA the authority to require pediatric studies of drugs, biological products, and vaccines under certain circumstances, with an aim to provide pediatric-specific labeling for drugs. Now, this act, together with the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, or BPCA, which provides an incentive of additional marketing exclusivity to sponsors who voluntarily complete certain pediatric studies, as requested by FDA, these have been just a huge step forward in providing appropriate labeling and instructions for children. Now, we all know that the absence of adequate pediatric use information in labeling poses significant risks for children. Inadequate pediatric dosing information in labeling may lead to inappropriate dosing, which can increase the risk of adverse reactions and lead to ineffective treatments. Failure to develop age-appropriate pediatric formulations of a drug may also deny pediatric patients access to important new therapies. Now, just like prescription products, PREA requirements also apply to non-prescription drug products and development programs that are under Section 505B. So this is if they include a new active ingredient, a new dosage form, a new dosing regimen, or a new route of administration. So FDA may waive this requirement in certain circumstances in full or in part. So, for example, if the disease or condition being treated would rarely, if ever, occur in pediatrics, if the drug would be ineffective or would be unsafe in pediatric patients, or if the drug does not represent a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing therapies and is not likely to be used in a substantial number of pediatric patients. So that sounds like it should be easy, right? Well, it may be relatively easy if the new drug represents a meaningful therapeutic difference and it is something that's, brand new, that's first in class, where there's an unmet medical need for treatment. The analysis, though, becomes much more challenging when we're talking about new combination therapies or extended release formulations of existing products. So this is particularly true in the non-prescription space, where consumers have to make an informed choice on their own without the guidance of a healthcare professional. So anyone who's ever been to a drugstore, and I think that's probably all of us, can appreciate the dizzying array of products that contain analgesics. This includes products that are marketed primarily for pain and fever, as well as combination products with cough-cold ingredients, antacids, diuretics, and stimulants. Now, many adult products are available in extended release formulations or in combinations with more than one analgesic. So for children, the options are much more limited, with a focus on immediate release formulations that treat both pain and fever. Now, however, even for children, the number of options is extensive and potentially overwhelming for parents and caregivers who are trying to make a choice. You know, they're standing there in front of the drugstore shelf and saying, well, which medication is best for my child? So that really brings us to the focus of today's meeting. Do we need more combination and extended release formulation analgesics and antipyretics for children? Do we need products developed for pain only and not for fever, or for fever only and not for pain? Would children benefit from these medications if available? Or do these products just pose greater risk of accidental overdose and expose children unnecessarily to medications that they don't need, or extended dosing that they also don't need? So do we need to worry more about medication errors if there are a whole variety of different dosing regimens out on the market? We saw this a number of years ago when there were multiple concentrations of acetaminophen on the market, and there were many medication errors. Is the risk of masking pain and fever for too long a time likely to mask a serious illness in a child who may not be able to describe their symptoms? Or are there other potential unintended consequences that we haven't thought about? So today's meeting brings together a variety of academic experts, consumer advocates, and industry to start to provide some perspectives on these important issues. So I very much look forward to, and I know the rest of the FDA staff very much look forward to, a really productive discussion today. We're interested to hear what the experts have to say on these issues, and so hang on to your hats. It should be a fun day. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Shila Azodi, who is a neurologist and senior medical officer in the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 1, and she'll give some regulatory background on non-prescription fever and pain products. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michele. You set the stage very well, and I was feeling the jitters of being in that pharmacy aisle as you described it. So my talk today, as Dr. Michele stated, is going to be on the regulatory background of children's non-prescription pain and fever products. And I also wanted to extend my thanks for everyone for being here today, both virtually and in person. And for my disclaimers, here's the information. So the views expressed in this presentation are mine and do not necessarily represent that of the FDA or the Department of Health and Human Services. And I have no financial conflicts of interest or relevant relationships to disclose. So in this presentation, I will provide the motivation and purpose for discussion of non-prescription pain and fever options in children 2 to less than 12 years old, and provide currently available non-prescription oral pain and fever products for children 2 to less than 12 years of age, going through their indications and characteristics. Lastly, I will wrap up this introduction by transitioning to the next topics and discussion points. And this motivation will largely build off of what Dr. Michele has already eloquently stated. So this public workshop was motivated by internal FDA discussion prompted by proposals to develop new drugs for non-prescription marketing that contain acetaminophen and NSAID or both for pain or pain and fever in adults. And under the Pediatric Research Equity Act, or PREA, FDA has the authority to consider if new drugs or combinations should be studied in children. The next talk by Dr. Nwokorie will explain FDA's authorities under PREA. And it became clear through many of these internal discussions that a broader perspective on the need for additional pain and fever products in children was needed. So the purpose of this workshop is to bring together a broad group of perspectives, including pediatricians, consumer advocates, pharmacists, industry, public health professionals with expertise in children's medication safety, as well as consumer behavior specialists, to understand if there is an unmet need among children 2 to less than 12 years for temporary relief of minor aches and pains or fever. And to complement feedback about any possible unmet needs, we will also engage these experts on the question of possible consequences of marketing additional pain and fever drugs with similar characteristics for this age group. So to further refine the purpose of this workshop, I will note that we are discussing only drug proposals that are, first, contain acetaminophen, an NSAID, or both, and second, given that acetaminophen is a monograph drug, or for clarification, a monograph drug is a drug product that is marketed, it's a drug product containing ingredients that comply with standards established in an applicable monograph as outlined historically in the rulemaking process or now through administrative process. So I also want to clarify that we are only discussing drugs subject to new drug applications. So if a manufacturer follows the conditions of the monograph, those drugs do not come under the FDA for review. And third, we are discussing children 2 to less than 12 years old and anticipate that at a future date there will be discussions for younger age groups. Last, our discussion only applies to proposed products that will have the same indications as acetaminophen and NSAID products, those basically that traditionally require only that consumer to self-diagnose and does not require monitoring by a healthcare professional. And finally, I want to highlight today that we are not discussing any specific products or proposals, and in the event that our panel discussions bring up any questions that relate to proprietary information, we will be unable to discuss that information. I will also note that in some of the presentations by healthcare providers today, they may discuss use of the products that are not based on non-prescription labeling, and off-label use of these products routinely occurs under the care of a healthcare provider. However, our consideration for the availability of additional acetaminophen, NSAID, or combination products will only be for those conditions where consumers can use the product on their own, not for availability for use by care under a healthcare provider. So to begin our discussion of the topic at hand, we wanted to begin by reviewing the products that are currently available for temporary relief of minor aches and pains and fever in children 2 to less than 12 years of age. Non-prescription active ingredients for this age and indication are acetaminophen and the NSAID ibuprofen. Another common feature of all of the currently available marketed pain and fever products, including both acetaminophen and ibuprofen, for children 2 to less than 12 years, is that they are immediate release products. So both have generally rapid drug absorption and clinical effect. And the currently available dosage forms for the acetaminophen and ibuprofen products for children 2 to less than 12 are variable by active ingredient. As I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, when referring to the scope, I noted that the acetaminophen products often follow the monograph conditions, and they do not come under FDA for review. Oral monograph acetaminophen products can be found as tablets,
chewable tablets, suspensions, powders, and other dosage forms. There is also a suppository version that is marketed under a new drug application. And for ibuprofen, dosage forms include tablets, chewable tablets, and suspensions. The dosing instructions for currently marketed pain and fever products for children 2 to less than 12 are standard and familiar for each product dosage form. So as we noted in the previous slide, each product has several options for dosage forms, so I'll provide only a few examples of each dosage form here. So for the ibuprofen solution, you'll note that the dosage is provided by weight, age, and then the dose in milliliters. And it is every 6 to 8 hours if needed. Similarly, for the ibuprofen chewable tablets, the dosing interval is every 6 to 8 hours if needed, and per the picture table with weight, age, and then the dose and the number of tablets. For the acetaminophen, the dosing interval for the suspension every 4 hours if needed, and the dosing instructions are as in this picture table, again with weight, age, and the dose in milliliters. So as Dr. Michele mentioned, acetaminophen dosing represents an area where much attention has been given to preventing medication errors. In the talks that follow, particularly in session 2, you will hear about the lessons learned and the importance of consumer understanding of correct acetaminophen instructions. Many of the lessons learned were communicated in 2015 in an FDA guidance document, over-the-counter pediatric oral liquid drug products containing acetaminophen. And I wanted to highlight some of the recommendations that were in that document here. As stated in the document, the goal of the guidance is to minimize the risk to consumers from liver damage associated with use of non-prescription acetaminophen drug products. So a few of the recommendations I'll highlight are, first, all single-ingredient acetaminophen oral liquid products for pediatric use marketed under the conditions of the monograph should have concentrations of 160 milligrams per 5 milliliters. Second, the product package should include an appropriate dosage delivery device, such as a calibrated and labeled oral syringe or dosing cup. And there was a recommendation to adopt container features designed to improve safety by potentially contributing to more accurate dosing and helping to reduce the incidence and magnitude of accidental acetaminophen ingestion by children, such as an appropriate flow restrictor contained in the opening of the immediate container. Another common feature of all currently available pain and fever products, both acetamin and ibuprofen for children 2 to less than 12, is that they are labeled both for temporary relief of minor aches and pains and fever reduction. So as mentioned earlier, we are discussing today proposed products that are appropriate for the established indications of non-prescription pain and fever products. I will present slides on these exact uses or indications as they are listed on the non-prescription labeling for both acetaminophen and ibuprofen. And the list of the conditions on drug facts label uses sections are not generally meant to be exhaustive but representative. So we note that these products have been available to consumers for many years, and there is a general awareness of conditions that are appropriately treated with these drug products. And we are not necessarily here to update or change those labeling, but we are here to inform our thinking about the conditions that consumers can treat these products, can use to treat these conditions appropriately. So for acetaminophen, the labeled indication is temporarily relieves minor aches and pains associated with common cold, flu, sore throat, headache, fever, and reduces fever. And similarly, the labeled uses for ibuprofen are temporarily relieves minor aches and pains due to common cold, flu, sore throat, headache, toothache, and reduces fever. So to wrap up and transition to the next talk, I hope we have reviewed the current non-prescription options for temporary relief of minor aches and pains for children 2 to less than 12 years to set the stage for our next panel and discussions. And Dr. Nwokorie will review PREA triggers, or conditions where FDA can require appropriate formulation development and clinical studies for new drugs. Session 1 will focus on potential benefits of developing additional acetaminophen or non-prescription products for children 2 to less than 12, and Session 2 will focus on potential risks of developing additional NSAID or acetaminophen products for children 2 to less than 12. And to meet the goals of understanding if there is an unmet medical need for additional acetaminophen or NSAID products, I hope that this presentation has established the currently marketable and marketed products in this area. We're very lucky to have a group of experts that will provide their experience on these discussion points. We look forward to a robust panel discussion to inform our thinking on this topic. Thank you so much for your time. The next speaker, Dr. Ndidi Nwokorie, is a pediatric emergency physician and senior scientist in the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health here at the FDA.
Thank you, Shila. Good morning, all, and welcome to the FDA. This morning, I will briefly discuss and give an overview of the Pediatric Research Equity Act, PREA, which is one of the key legislations guiding pediatric drug development here in the U.S. I have nothing to disclose. The views expressed in this talk represent my opinions and do not necessarily represent the views of the FDA. In this presentation, I will give an overview of PREA, as I stated, which requires sponsors to conduct pediatric studies under certain circumstances. I will review the general guiding principles as well as the goal of the statute. I will discuss the conditions under which PREA applies, including the studies required by PREA and circumstances under which a waiver of required assessments could be granted. And lastly, I will briefly discuss our authority under PREA to require consumer use studies, a unique tool utilized in non-prescription drug development to evaluate the safe use of drug products. In general, pediatric drug development is governed by the principle that we should give pediatric patients products which have been appropriately evaluated for them, and development programs should be included in pediatric studies when pediatric use is anticipated following the approval of a drug for another population, such as in adults or older adolescents. The goals of PREA are to require that products being developed for adult use ideally provide pediatric assessments at the same time as adults, unless we agree in advance that the necessary studies to evaluate dosing, efficacy, or safety can be waived or deferred to some or all age groups until some time after the marketing application is approved for adults. It's also to encourage drug developers to think early in product development how they will study their investigational product in all pediatric age groups in which the product would be expected to have a benefit, including the need to develop an age-appropriate formulation, as you've heard previously, to appropriately administer their product to all patients. And lastly, is to avoid off-label use as much as possible in the pediatric population and to ensure that products anticipated to have public health benefits in the pediatric population are studied in all relevant age groups so pediatric prescribers have confidence that the pediatric dosing in the product labeling is evidence-based. Note, PREA applies to all new drug applications and biologic license applications, but does not apply to monograph active ingredients. I will use the term NDA for the remainder of this presentation to refer to all new drug applications. PREA requires pediatric studies of certain drug products when an application for one of the following is submitted: a new active ingredient that has not been previously approved by FDA, which includes any new salts, and new fixed-dose combinations, or the applications for an approved active ingredient, but the applicant is seeking a new indication or is developing a new dosage form that is different from the approved dosage form. For example, if the drug exists as an immediate release tablet, but now the sponsor plans to develop an extended release tablet or capsule. A new route of administration from previously approved route of administration would be subject to PREA. A sponsor proposing a new dosing regimen. For example, the drug is given 3 times a day, but now the sponsor proposes a once-a-day regimen. That product would be subject to PREA. And although not relevant to non-prescription drug development, PREA also requires that a molecularly targeted cancer drug be investigated in pediatrics when FDA determines the molecular target of that drug product is substantially relevant to pediatric cancer. So as stated, PREA authorizes the FDA to require pediatric assessment for for products developed for adults that meet the criteria just discussed in the last slide. However, sponsors may request a waiver of required assessment in all or a subset of the pediatric population under certain circumstances. First, when necessary studies are impossible or highly impracticable. This would apply when the indication is so rare or the patients are geographically dispersed such that the numbers required to reliably study the product are too few. Next, if the evidence strongly suggests the drug would be ineffective or unsafe in the intended pediatric population. For example, data demonstrates that the indication would require a healthcare provider to diagnose and manage the condition in pediatric populations. Therefore, self-selection by caregivers may lead to misdiagnosis and unsafe use if developed for non-prescription use in that pediatric population. If a waiver is granted based on this criterion of safety, the sponsor must include this information in labeling when the product goes to marketing, even if the product is ultimately approved in adults only. A third reason to consider a waiver is if there is evidence to suggest the drug does not represent a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing therapies and is not likely to be used by a substantial number of pediatric patients. Note, for this criterion to apply, both conditions must be met. FDA must make a determination that there is sufficient evidence the product does not provide a benefit over existing therapies. However, even if there is evidence that a product does not provide a meaningful benefit over existing therapy, FDA still needs to determine if there is evidence a substantial number of pediatric patients would use the product if the drug were marketed. In that case, PREA would apply and pediatric assessment would be required. The last waiver criterion is that reasonable attempts have been made to produce an age-appropriate pediatric formulation, but those attempts failed. In that instance, the applicant may be granted a partial waiver for that specific pediatric age group. So how does this impact non-prescription analgesic antipyretic drug development? Well, under PREA, FDA has the authority to require drug companies to develop their new analgesic antipyretic products that are subject to PREA in the pediatric population. The question then is, should we exercise this authority, or are there waiver criteria that would apply for these analgesic antipyretic active ingredients under discussion today? That is, FDA must determine, based on available evidence, if the product would be unsafe or ineffective in the pediatric population or a subset of the population, whether the product could be studied in all or a specific pediatric population, and lastly, whether the product provides a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing therapies, and will it be used by a substantial number of pediatric patients. PREA requires drug developers submit an initial pediatric study plan during early discussion of their product development, outlining how they plan to support safety and effectiveness of their drug in the pediatric population. The pediatric assessment may be submitted at the time of the NDA submission, or deferred studies may be issued in the form of PREA, post-marketing requirements, which would then be submitted at a pre-specified time after the approval of the NDA. If the drug developer or FDA determines that product will not provide a public health benefit for any or all pediatric populations, then the pediatric study plan must include the request for a waiver, as previously stated, and the justification for why the product will not provide a public health benefit. Specific assessments required to support non-prescription use in a pediatric population may include, but are not limited to, the use of extrapolation to leverage information from existing efficacy and safety data when appropriate, efficacy studies to establish efficacy in the target pediatric population if extrapolation of efficacy is not acceptable, PK and dosing studies to ensure correct dosing when necessary, and safety studies, which may include consumer use studies such as label comprehension studies, actual use studies, and self-selection studies. So, with the authority PREA affords the FDA in mind as we discuss this important topic before us today, let us remember that the ultimate goal of PREA is to provide pediatric use information in labeling based on appropriate studies conducted in children and to close any gaps in unmet health needs in the pediatric population. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nwokorie. So to begin session 1 today, where we will be discussing current perspectives on consumer use of non-prescription pain and fever products with a focus on potential unmet needs, we will have our first speaker, Dr. Ian Paul, a professor of pediatrics and public health sciences at the Pennsylvania State University College of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Paul.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm a practicing pediatrician as well as a researcher, so a lot of my my research questions and academic discussions are informed by my clinical practice. So happy to just be here to discuss this today. I do have a number of disclosures. Over the past 20 years, I have worked in a variety of capacities with several organizations listed here. So in ambulatory clinical practice, like what I have in general pediatrics, over-the-counter pediatric medications for pain and fever are used in a variety of clinical circumstances, fever being first, pain from mild common conditions, as we saw in the previous talk listed, common cold, sore throat, ear pain, body ache, tooth pain, and headache, as well as for musculoskeletal pain, such as things from injuries, sprains, strains, fractures, and bruises. You know, a small contrast between what the label dosing is. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2011 issued a clinical practice guideline for the use of antipyretics in children. And this really is what the professional dosing recommendations are. I was privileged to participate with the group that developed this. And what you'll see here is that acetaminophen can be dosed 10 to 15 milligrams per kilogram every 4 hours, up to 5 times per day, in children as young as age 3 months. You'll also note that the duration of effect listed for acetaminophen as 4 to 6 hours. Ibuprofen, on the other hand, 10 milligrams per kilogram per dose, up to 4 times per day, every 6 hours, with a duration of action of 6 to 8 hours, and that can be used in children as young as age 6 months. I'd note that naproxen also is available over the counter, but there's no label dosing for children less than 12 years old. So these drugs are pretty good, and they work pretty well in clinical practice. They're available in numerous formulations to suit the child's abilities or preferences in liquids, chewables, tablets, capsules, suppositories. And they're generally effective at reducing fever and pain at the recommended over-the-counter doses for these conditions that I listed previously, these common self-limited conditions. They have a good side effect profile when taken at the recommended doses for the recommended duration of time. And a question that often comes up is, could you be masking something more serious when using these medications? And I think my clinical experience, as well as those of, I think, most pediatricians, is that if a child has a severe illness, and an example would be meningitis, acetaminophen and ibuprofen aren't going to sufficiently mask those symptoms as you observe the child. So there are some limitations. So they're generally short duration of action, as I showed on a prior slide, maybe 6 to 8 hours at most, which doesn't really cover the whole school day, and it certainly doesn't cover the typical child overnight sleep duration. And even with the current formulations, there are some children that have difficulty with all of those formulations. So does anyone in this room not have a smartphone? Okay, so I didn't get my first cell phone until late 2001, I think. And on January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs and Apple introduced the first iPhone. When that happened, did you know that you needed it? Is there anyone in this room that would say they don't need it now? So my point is, we don't know what we need or what we'll think we'll need over time. So things can change once we have them available to us. So what are some options for children 2 to less than 12? So naproxen, with a longer duration of action, has a similar efficacy and safety profile for ibuprofen for pain, but there's just no dosing and formulations available over the counter for children. What about combination products? So as we know, acetaminophen ibuprofen combination product is currently FDA approved and marketed for pain relief in those 12 and over. There are no naproxen acetaminophen combinations. But for children, without these combination products, co-administration of acetaminophen and ibuprofen are very common by caregivers. And they're even recommended by pediatricians and clinicians. A frequently cited example would be a child that's had febrile seizures. Despite what the evidence says, parents will use both medications with any illness in an attempt to prevent fever so that a febrile seizure won't ensue. Not evidence-based practice, but that is what parents do. So that's just a common example. So would caregivers like a combination product if it were available is the question. So are there advantages? So about 15 years ago, I led a study that compared the antipyretic effect of 3 treatment regimens over 6-hour observation children in kids that were 6 months to 7 years. There were 60 kids that participated. So common conditions, URIs, ear infections were the children enrolled. And we had 3 dosing regimens, and we used the professional dosing of ibuprofen 10 milligrams per kilogram and acetaminophen 15 milligrams per kilogram. And in this study, we had 3 arms. The first arm just got ibuprofen, and we followed them for 6 hours. Second arm got ibuprofen and acetaminophen administered together, followed for 6 hours. And then the third arm got ibuprofen and then alternating with acetaminophen at 3 hours post-dose. And we followed them, all these children, for a total of 6 hours. And you'll see here the fever curves. And on the x-axis is hours, and on the y-axis is their mean temperature. The blue line is ibuprofen alone, and the reddish line is acetaminophen and ibuprofen administered together. And the green one is ibuprofen followed by acetaminophen. And what we found was a key significant differences. So while the ibuprofen alone arm showed return to what the baseline temperature was, the combination and alternating groups, the temperatures remained lower and afebrile through 6 hours. A meta-analysis was conveniently published 2 months ago that covered this topic, and this was for fever, and what the conclusion was, as you see highlighted, was that dual may be superior to single therapies for treating fever in children. Now, key limitation here is that we're talking about fever with both the study that I led as well as this meta-analysis. Pain is harder to study in kids, and outcome measures are trickier. So harder to draw conclusions for pain, but these are the data that have emerged for fever in children. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. So our next speaker today is Dr. Diane Hindman. She's a pediatrician, medical toxicologist, and pharmacist from the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Hindman.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in Washington, although it's a little bit colder and wetter than what I'm used to. Let's see here. I have no financial disclosures, and my views and opinions expressed today are mine and don't necessarily relate or reflect policies of any of my employers or agencies I represent. I will address the objectives as noted on this slide and will obviously duplicate some of the information that's already being presented. Excuse me. Children with pain and or fever may be miserable and not behaving as they normally do. This causes parents and caregivers to be panicked, worried, and to feel helpless. Consequently, parents and caregivers commonly seek immediate medical care. This also frequently prompts administration of medicines, either separately or in combination. It's important to remember that pain and fever are physiologic symptoms and not actual illnesses. Fever, defined as a temperature of at least 100.4 Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius, is a common initial presentation in many childhood illnesses that are often benign. Fever is also beneficial in fighting infection. It retards bacterial and viral growth and reproduction, enhances white blood cell proliferation, and aids in the acute phase response. The duration of fever doesn't always correlate with illness severity. The degree of fever doesn't always correlate with illness severity, and most fevers are of short duration. Pain is prevalent with many conditions, as noted on the slide, and for pain and fever, self-care with analgesics and antipyretics is usually appropriate, although not always necessary. Ongoing pain and or fever or other worrisome symptoms, especially lasting longer than 7 days, may require more than simply self-care. This slide shows the actual dosage forms and concentrations or strengths that are available. I've not included other products such as naproxen per se because the focus is not going to really be on those products. But you might also note from the slide that some of the asterisked items are available but not necessarily recommended for children under the age of 12, and advice on the label does suggest that parents should consult a medical provider. This table you've also seen does come from the clinical guideline that was produced by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Dosing recommendations, the times to onset, peak, and duration of effects are summarized, as you can see. And although we typically recommend pediatric dosing based on milligram per kilo dose calculations, many children may actually exceed the recommended weight-based doses. Please note that all single doses should not exceed adult maximum doses because of toxicity concerns, especially with acetaminophen, where hepatic injury is possible when used at higher doses and/or for longer periods of time. Rectal acetaminophen is typically recommended up to 20 milligrams per kilo per dose, with a daily maximum recommended at 75 milligrams per kilo per day, because rectal absorption may lead to lower therapeutic levels than what we see orally. The 3-month lower age limit for acetaminophen stems from not wanting to mask evidence of a serious infection in teeny beans or other illness that may not have become evident in a child as young as 3 months. And the 6-month lower age limit for ibuprofen has typically been based on renal immaturity and the potential for renal injury as a result of dosing. There's much evidence that acetaminophen and ibuprofen are generally well tolerated for fever and mild to moderate pain if given in appropriate doses and frequency. Studies also support equal efficacy of both oral and rectal acetaminophen for fever. We know that proper fever dosing with these medicines doesn't prevent febrile seizures, although we don't necessarily know the mechanism, but administering antipyretics in such children can help the child feel better, allows them to continue to drink to stay hydrated, and to interact more normally, thus reassuring parents and caregivers. Although many studies have assessed short-term single, dual, combined, or alternating therapy with these drugs, interpretation of the evidence is complex. Studies have varied widely, used different definitions and endpoints, and aren't easily compared. However, the meta-analysis that Dr. Paul shared recently has addressed or tried to address particularly the combined and alternating therapy, because that has become fairly prevalent in practice. But it does show that the combination, either alternating or together, may be superior to acetaminophen, but could be comparable to ibuprofen even at 7.5 to 10 milligrams per kilo for fever at 4 and 6 hours post-dosing. They also considered that acetaminophen, 10 to 15 milligrams per kilo, which is typically the dose that we recommend, was no different than lower ibuprofen doses given at 5 to 7.5 milligrams per kilo. Evidence related to acetaminophen and ibuprofen use alone for analgesia is equally challenging to interpret. We know that ibuprofen has the benefit of anti-inflammatory properties that acetaminophen lacks, so may be preferable when inflammation contributes to pain. Much of the literature has evaluated these medications relative to opioids and various other nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Back in 2004, Paris et al. Showed comparable pain relief with ibuprofen or acetaminophen at 2 and 4 hours after dosing, as noted on the slide. I've summarized several specific study outcomes for various pain conditions in children that do support use of these medications for analgesia. There are definitely many more published studies. However, there is a paucity of evidence that has evaluated combined acetaminophen ibuprofen dosage forms in children, although there is some literature support in adults. One study, an Italian consensus trial, considered a fixed combination of acetaminophen and ibuprofen oral suspension in a 3.1 to 1 milligram ratio for mild to moderate pain in children where monotherapy was ineffective. They concluded such use was appropriate, except in cases where ENT or abdominal surgery had been done, and the concern there was related to hemorrhagic problems. They cited benefits of being able to optimize the dose relative to the child's weight while reducing parental dosing errors compared to combined administration of 2 separate drugs, as well as quick pain control and greater effectiveness. I remind the audience that currently we don't have an approved U.S. product that combines those 2 agents that is actually labeled for children under the age of 12. And please note that the adult product that does contain that combination is in a ratio of 2 to 1 milligrams, or 250 and 125 milligrams of the respective drugs in each tablet. Numerous clinical trials have evaluated adverse effects of acetaminophen and ibuprofen, and found no significant difference in systemic adverse effects, assuming dosing was appropriate. Summary of the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, or FAERS, data from 2003 to 2021 did highlight the risk of renal injury associated with both acetaminophen and ibuprofen in children under 18, but was unable to clearly delineate normal dosing from other situations such as intentional poisoning. Referring back to dosing recommendations for children under 6 months of age, Walsh et al. In 2018 retrospectively evaluated acetaminophen or ibuprofen use in this population. Although acetaminophen was used most often, no increase in relative risk of any adverse effect was found for infants receiving ibuprofen. There was also no significant difference in severe GI or renal adverse effects in cases given ibuprofen and or acetaminophen relative to those receiving only acetaminophen. However, young infants had more GI adverse effects when ibuprofen was given alone compared with those receiving only acetaminophen. A non-inferiority randomized controlled trial involving acetaminophen and ibuprofen by Dirks et al. In 2019 found no significant difference in severe bleeding status post tonsillectomy and or adenoidectomy. No significant adverse effects or deaths at all were reported in that study. The American Academy of Pediatrics has several resources speaking to fever and antipyretic use in children. A clinical report mentioned by Dr. Paul does exist that supports the appropriate use of these drugs if antipyresis is needed. The document does not offer firm recommendations regarding alternating or combination therapy because the evidence has been unclear. AAP also offers excellent information for parents and caregivers on the use of these medicines on their website, healthychildren.org, attempting to dispel the fear that often accompanies fever. As such, the recent article that Dr. Paul mentioned by De La Cruz-Meña regarding the potential combination and alternating doses has highlighted by Drs. Wade and Mathis in pediatrics that there are still concerns and uncertainty related to appropriateness and side effect risk when both of these medications are given in combination or alternately. As such, no consensus supporting alternating or combined dosing currently exists with the AAP. Also, the AAP has no current recommendations regarding acetaminophen and or ibuprofen dosing for mild to moderate pain, although there was a most recent publication in November for pediatrics that looked at opioid use prescribing in this population. The AAP Committee on Drugs is deliberating currently on the need for a practice guideline outlining OTC use of acetaminophen and or ibuprofen for acute pain management, but nothing exists at this time, and we're hoping that the symposium today will help to inform some of our deliberations. As both a pharmacist and a physician, I've encountered many perspectives from parents and caregivers on the management of pain and or fever. Fever phobia is definitely real, and fever is often inaccurately defined and poorly understood by parents and caregivers. Many parents won't give fever or pain medicines until their child is seen by a medical provider, hence causing a lot of rush medical visits at urgent cares, emergency departments, primary care offices, etc. Parents often have a preference for one or other medication that could be based on available flavors or formulations, or their experience of a better outcome with a particular product. Children with autism or other sensitivities are often prone to issues related to a particular medication or medications in general, so parents often use whatever the child will take. Many parents are unaware of currently available products, such as the available of acetaminophen suppositories for a child when vomiting is present, or the potential for analgesia plus anti-inflammatory benefit from ibuprofen relative to acetaminophen. An important area where there's lacking knowledge is combination products, and I use the multi-symptom cough and cold products as an example. In my experience, a majority of parents are unaware of the acetaminophen or ibuprofen contained in such products and often get overwhelmed when seeking such products in the grocery store or pharmacy. So choose a product based on symptoms highlighted on the package without realizing or reading the actual drugs contained. In the lay population, there's also confusion about medication brand and generic names. Product strengths, such as the difference between acetaminophen and ibuprofen concentrations, especially with 2 concentrations for ibuprofen, and interpretation of milligrams versus mils versus oral syringe volumes that they're supposed to give. These can all lead to the risk of medication error, toxicity, and or underdosing. Many parents assume that acetaminophen or ibuprofen will get rid of fever or pain and become worried when either recur as the medication wears off. Similarly, when medical providers suggest parents alternate acetaminophen and ibuprofen, this is often inadequately explained, so parents frequently administer alternating doses in a fashion that isn't compatible with the respective medication pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Parents and caregivers have suggested some new products for pain and fever that include formulations that their child will take. Not sure what that is, but gummies is one of the things that was thrown out. Products with more flavor options and those with natural flavors and colors, in light of many people being concerned about artificial flavors and colors at this time. And choices that act longer, so fewer doses are needed daily. As a clinician, I've realized various other perspectives. The most common reasons acetaminophen or ibuprofen don't work is that doses are inadequate often for the child's size or not given frequently enough. Package instructions are confusing to many patients, especially if they don't know how much their child weighs, are unfamiliar with the idea of milligram per kilogram dosing, have difficulty interpreting how often they can give a dose, or haven't received clear instructions from their provider, or in many cases, the nurse helpline that they've reached out to. As a toxicologist, I frequently encounter intentional or unintentional ingestions related to the availability of bulk package sizes and products that look like candies or taste good. Referring to the America's Poison Center's data, their most recent publication of 2022 data identified analgesics, including acetaminophen and ibuprofen, as the #1 category, making up 11.5% of all human exposures reported. In pediatric exposures for children 5 or under, analgesics were the #2 category after household cleaning substances, but still comprised 9.5% of cases. 39% of cases for analgesic overdose, particularly acetaminophen, required antidote therapy with N-acetylcysteine in that same year, which suggests that there still is a lot of toxicity happening out there. Having completed 2 research studies personally in 2013 and 2024, it's also clear that safe storage, awareness, and parent or caregiver recognition of danger is less than ideal even for acetaminophen and ibuprofen. Based on experience with other combination products and potential marketing of fever-only or pain-only products, parental confusion and safety concerns can't be overlooked. There are a number of potential future needs in the market. Similar to acetaminophen, the availability of ibuprofen suppositories and powders may offer benefits. New formulations such as intranasal and oral dissolving tablets may have merit based on our experience with intranasal sedation and ODT anti-nausea use in pediatrics. A new administration device, such as a nipple container, could facilitate administration to infants and toddlers. Although ibuprofen oral liquid in one standard concentration would reduce dosing errors, additional chewable tablet and suppository strengths of both drugs may facilitate achieving the right dose of medication without having to break existing tablets or suppositories. As naproxen has been found to be safe and effective as an OTC medicine in patients over 12, research and availability of naproxen in younger patients may offer benefits, but parents and caregivers would need to be educated that it is also an NSAID and hence couldn't be given concomitantly with ibuprofen. Due to the existing misunderstanding and conclusion regarding OTC pain and fever medications, standardizing parent teaching materials could optimize understanding and raise awareness of risks associated with medication administration and storage. One could argue that we don't need new formulations or molecules to manage fever or pain that is mild to moderate in children 2 to up to 12 years of age. However, the unclear evidence of issues such as alternating or combined dosing and lacking information about a combination acetaminophen ibuprofen formulation in this population suggests that opportunities for further research may be warranted. Adding new drugs to the OTC market, such as naproxen, may also be beneficial in this population, provided appropriate research is undertaken. If such research was conducted, it would be important to have clear definitions, inclusion and exclusion criteria, outcomes, and monitoring for serious adverse effects in the various patient populations. Parents and caregivers should be included in research about safe use and storage, as well as product labeling and interpretation. In summary, acetaminophen and ibuprofen are effective and generally safe in the population of interest, although it remains unclear which drug and dosing format are optimal in all situations. Definitive research is lacking, but there appear to be opportunities for new routes, formulations, strengths, and perhaps new chemical entities for use in younger children. Research on products as well as labeling and education will be essential to safe, effective, and appropriate use of medications for fever and mild to moderate pain in children. I'm happy to answer any questions during the panel session. And there are numerous references. Please feel free to refer to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hindman. So our next talk will be co-presented by Leanne West, Chief Engineer of Pediatric Technologies at Georgia Institute of Technology and President of the International Children's Advisory Network, and Casey Cashman, Director of the Pediatric Pain Warrior Program, part of the U.S. Pain Foundation. Welcome.
Good morning. So both Leanne and I have nothing to disclose. So we're here to talk about that parents just don't feel right now that their current over-the-counter medications are sufficient enough for their needs. Some desired over-the-counter options that they are looking for, and we will go into this more, are gel tablets and capsules are preferred for ease of swallowing, making them suitable for those who struggle with traditional pills. Higher doses of chewables to make it for people who can't take liquids or don't like the liquids, they're looking for the higher doses of the chewables. And there's a strong emphasis on cost effectiveness and ease of use when selecting over-the-counter options. Consumers show a preference of a natural and organic products, as well as the presentation prior to us was talking about people are not looking for the artificial ingredients anymore.
All right, so some of the specific needs that were highlighted by families that we work with. Thinking about targeted medications to treat only what you need. So I've been sent to the pharmacy and my kid has a runny nose and a fever, but all I can find is runny nose, fever, and cough. Well, my kid doesn't have the cough. Is this still okay to take? I'd rather have one that just treats what I want it to treat. Longer lasting pain relief, that's really critical. We heard from a lot of families, you want to be able to get through the school day, you want to be able to get through your extracurricular activities, you want to be able to get through the night so you don't have to go to the ER in the middle of the night. Effective medications, again, to support the school attendance, sleep benefits. So again, if my kid has an earache at 10 o'clock at night, I don't want to go to the ER at that hour. I want to be able to wait until the morning. So can we get through the night? Again, the emergency dosing in that situation and always avoiding the emergency room in general if you can. So looking at other alternatives, thinking about skin-based and non-invasive topical treatments, could that be an option for some of the different things that parents go to get pain medicine for? And then also really thinking about what's been tested in children. I want to make sure that it is safe for my child. And this is a big one, the weight-based dosing preference versus age. So if it says, if my child is really skinny for their age, do I go by the age dosing or do I go by the weight dosing? Which one is the right one for me if they're different? I think that's a big problem. And then clearer packaging. So I think there's all sorts of issues there. You're overwhelmed by the number of choices. You don't know what you can take together. A couple of people have mentioned alternating doses. So when do I alternate? When do I not? Which one is better for me? Which one is not? And again, just by the guidance, learning the difference between ibuprofen, acetaminophen, and naproxen. I probably don't know. And y'all have had a lot of lingo up here. I mean, I'm in the healthcare world, and some of it I haven't ever heard before. So you have to think that the average parent does not know a lot of the terminology that you threw out, but that's also what you see on the packaging, right? So making it a little bit simpler for people. Again, looking at age and the specific situation that you have and weight, which one is the right one? I don't want to overgive. I don't want to undergive. And then, again, alternating the medications effectively. When do I do it and when do I not? When is it appropriate?
So we must address consumers' needs and enhance over-the-counter development and testing for children for improved health outcomes in our kids. So some of the key takeaways that we have here is increase and customize over-the-counter options for kids. Parents are calling for a wider range, and I know that some of us think when we go down that aisle there already are a ton of options, which there are, but there are some that I think that we are still missing. As we were mentioning about like the topicals and stuff, like that would be for some of those sports injuries. You know, at the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, they could get kicked by a soccer ball and they just have some pain in their leg from that. And so if we had the different options for topicals, for things of that nature, might help out. But we are looking for specifically options that consider children's preferences, like the higher dose chewables, the gel tablets, and the natural ones. We do need to take kids' preferences into a lot of this. We can't just be like, oh, well, there is a pill form, they should be fine taking that. Because these kids do have a mind of their own. For anybody in here who's a parent knows that they have a mind of their own at times. Providing longer lasting relief options. To get kids through the school, I'm not saying send them to school when they're sick, but if it's an ear infection and we can help them get through that day, as well as the sleep part. While it's so important for the kid themselves as a parent, when you finally get your kid to go to sleep who's up in the middle of the night and you only have that 4 to 6 hour window, if by the time now your nerves have calmed down and you've cleaned up perhaps whatever the mess was that was made, you're now not sleeping either. And the importance of that parent getting a couple hours of sleep to be able to effectively treat the patient and their child is so crucial. So having that extended release is definitely beneficial. And then enhanced safety, dosage, and guidance. Again, we've all been down these aisles and we know what we're looking at, and it's still very confusing. But then you have to think about that parent who's going, you know, that is in that drugstore aisle at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you know the mom is home with the kid screaming, and they sent dad to the pharmacy aisle, who's never had to look down this aisle because mom's always the one who's shopping. And now they have no idea what they're looking for, and it is very confusing for them. And so we need to have clearer labeling on all of these different medications for those individuals to be able to easily pick up and know what medication that they are looking for. And that was all that we have, and we thank you guys for having us.
Thank you, Leanne and Casey. So our next speaker is Dr. Jody Thomas. She is presenting virtually. She is a clinical health psychologist and specialist in pediatric medical illness and trauma, and the founder and CEO of the Meg Foundation.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me, or that someone's going to tell me if they can't. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really sorry I can't be there live and in person, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here virtually. So yes, I'm a clinical health psychologist specializing in medical illness, trauma, and pain. And I'm also the founder of the Meg Foundation, which is a nonprofit dedicated to empowering kids and families around pain and pain management. So I've spent 25 years in this field, hearing a lot about kids in pain. Let me make sure. Oh, good. I have no financial disclosures or disclaimers to share with you all today. So I wanted to take a moment for all of us, and we're sitting there thinking about the needs of kids, to pay attention to a few statistics that help us really kind of think about this population as is relevant to this question about the 2 to 12-year-olds and over-the-counter pain meds. So first thing to know is that there are 72.5 million kids in the United States, representing 33.2 million households with those kiddos in them. So it's already been kind of mentioned, there are several factors of this population that are going to impact when we're paying attention to need, but also the number of people who would have these needs. So currently, it's identified that 1 in 36 kids has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. So that represents over 2 million kids in the US. And for kids on the spectrum, pain is definitely a little bit different. And whether or not there's a population of those kids that are hyposensitive, less sensitive to pain, and hypersensitive. In addition, making that a little more complicated, their ability to communicate their pain experience, even to themselves and also to their family and to providers, is limited. And we're taking an abstract concept and putting in abstract terms, which can be challenging for kids who tend to think in a more concrete way, let alone we're talking about potential impacts on communication and communication styles. So we end up depending really heavily, as we should, on families who know that child better to be able to be making those calls and decisions. And they're very likely to be part of the 1 in 6 children that has some sort of sensory processing disorder. And that is over 12 million kids in the US alone. And that's really, really relevant to some of the things that have been talked about already in terms of availability of delivery mechanisms, flavors, tastes, and other various sensitivities. I other want to note, as we're sitting there and thinking about the needs of kids and families, that over 18 million kids live in a household with a single parent. And I bring that up because the responsibility of that single parent is huge. And we need to also be thinking about how we can support those parents in being able to meet the needs of their kids through what is available to them over the counter and the information we are sharing and giving to them, that help them make those decisions, those really important decisions that they have to make. And additionally, I want to point out that over 20% of kids experience chronic pain. And that represents chronic headache, chronic abdominal pain, body pain. And that the truth is whether or not that becomes identified, that the vast majority of those families are using over-the-counter medications to be able to get their kids to a point where they're able to function and to be able to do the things that they need to do to be kids. So the roles for that 20%, which is 14.5 million kids in the United States, they are depending also on these medications and the availability of formulations and delivery methods to be able to keep their kid to a functional state. And that's not even acknowledging there where we also want to think about, again, as we've talked about, the normal bumps and bruises of childhood, the normal injuries, the normal broken bones, and how do we bring those kids, keep their pain under control? And not only thinking about those moments of that pain, but again, as someone who's worked in this field for a really long time, those future pain experiences as well, because what we're doing now is going to create a big impact on that. So taking a moment to think about pills. Now, interestingly, if you dive into the research on this, the numbers have a wide range, but really what we know is anywhere from 25 to 60% of kids really struggle to take a traditional tablet or a tablet or capsule. Now, also interesting that that also can very much persist not only through adolescence, but also into adulthood. So having alternative ways, as been mentioned by Casey and Leanne and other participants, other ways to think about how we can deliver that medication is incredibly important. Now, this is something I hear all the time. As someone who spent a lot of also my career in hospitals and working with other kids, being able to teach kids how to take medications is a huge emphasis in mental health world. And so having other options, I assure you, is exceptionally important. There are things like gel tabs, and this comes up a lot given now the prevalence of gel tabs in the adult population. Now, taking a gel tab is significantly easier, particularly when we're talking about sensory sensitive kids. So that feeling of that tablet, that feeling of that capsule in the throat can often be the very thing that prevents them from being able to take that medication. Similarly, and I think about all these cases, and that's really what I wanted to be able to do today with you as well, is kind of turn some of this, these statistics and research that we're showing, which is so important, but really think about the human face inside of that. So chewables. Now, I can't tell you the number of teenagers, and I think about this one teenager in particular who ends up in my office because they're struggling so badly to be able to take just their typical medications. And for pain management, we think about chewables, which are great. Chewables, especially as kids are getting older and heavier and requiring bigger doses, the cost of giving a kid enough chewables in order to be able to do that. And also you're really depending on people to do math, to be able to calculate and figure that out. And that becomes a dangerous game, right? We want people having a very clear level of instruction and not depending on them for doing problem solving and math problems. But this kiddo would regularly sit there, and the amount of chewables is insane. So being able to have higher dose chewables would be exceptionally important and is definitely a theme we hear on repeat. Similarly, we have a whole series of kids. Not only we think about the health consciousness that's already been talked about, but there's a number of kids with either persistent GI issues and or food sensitivities that taking the medications actually causes more GI distress, pain, and issues with the stomach. And so one of the other big things that comes up, as mentioned by Casey also and mentioned by Casey and Leanne as well, is the desire for topicals. The ability to skip the GI tract entirely when we're talking about delivering pain relief and being able directly to the source. Now, joint pain is incredibly common, and being able to put that or specific injury pain, like Casey's example, a sports injury, and being able to put a topical directly on that point to be able to skip the rest of the system is something parents ask about all the time. And again, this would all depend on really good labeling. But I just want to note that with the prevalence now of topicals within the adult population, most people have sort of this cognitive framework to map on that that would facilitate their learning and understanding if we had a better understanding of how to dose this and use it appropriately in kids. Patches, same story. That is a very common question. Is there a patch? Is there something where I can stop having to have my kid take a pill? Now, I'm a mom of a kid who has joint pain as well. And I can't tell you how much I would love doing this. I've worked in this field forever. I'm incredibly comfortable in the medical world and pain world. And I sit here and have a lot of questions and concerns. And whenever I do, I think a lot about the parents who do not have my level of experience or expertise and how much they struggle and how many questions that they have. So being able to have other options like this would be truly game changing for a lot of people. And we really want to think about that scene, and it's been mentioned, but we've all been there where it's middle of the night, we're sleeping, dead out, exhausted, and all of a sudden we have that hysterical child at our bedside, or we're hearing those screams from the other room. and that kiddo might be sick and with a fever, really taking a second to put yourself in the themes that parent who knows that the most important thing that they probably could do for that kiddo right there is to get them back to sleep and to have them be asleep. That the chances are tomorrow not only is going to be improved, but they're going to get better if we can just get them back to bed. But we don't have anything in the house. So if we are lucky enough to live in a house with a 2-parent household, we are sending that other parent to that store. I love that this is an example has come up with all the speakers, because it just really speaks to the fact at how prevalent an issue this, where you're standing there in the middle of that store trying to figure out what you're going to do. And I've been on the receiving end of those texts from my husband being like, wait a minute, it says for cough and fever and sore throat, but they don't have a cough. Do I give them this? Do I not? What am I doing? And if you ever want an example of where design has been failing us, it is that parent at 2 a.m. trying to figure out what to do. That we really do need to think about how we're designing how that information is delivered, and to clarify for parents to make this scene a little bit more manageable for everyone, so we can go back and make sure and feel confident in our ability to treat appropriately our kids. So the thing that's come up that I also want to reinforce is the many versions of 10 years old. So this is actually my daughter and her 2 best friends, who are a brilliant example of how all this looks so differently. There is a 40-pound weight difference between these very normally beautifully developing, healthy 10-year-old girls. And this is actually a question that's come up. My mom has called me, as I have to say, I'm like, I am not a physician. I am a psychologist. We need to talk to those physicians. But how do we appropriately dose? The dose that we would give Emery and the dose that we would give Maya to effectively treat their pain or fever is going to be really different. And even though that information is sometimes available, it's not really emphasized as much. And a lot of people are still very attached to the age-based. And I think it's a big deficit within pain world to really understand that even that age things are based on approximate and average weights, that dosing, that piece is going to be really important. And that, I think, definitely, even though that information has been out there, but again, it's in that label with all the jargon and so much information, that we want to be able to find new ways to be able to communicate that effectively. Because really what we hear is that parents often are just drowning under the amount of information that's out there, and they want to be able to have more clarity. So just to kind of take you through some of those scenarios real quick, you have that 8-year-old who wakes up with a headache, and you are a single parent. You have got 43 minutes to get everyone out the door and into school. You cannot afford to miss work again today. And the truth is, this kid is not showing fever or signs of infection, that if we can appropriately treat that headache, they can go to school and do fine. And it's definitely where they should be for their benefit. And you as a parent need to be for the benefit of you and your family. But you also know that if you're going to give them a dose of Tylenol, ibuprofen, that is not going to get them through the day. And if you wanted to try to send medication to school, the truth is you can't. You can't do that unless you're going to have a note from your doctor saying that that kid can be dosed. And there's no chance of that happening in the next 43 minutes before you have to deliver that kiddo fed and feeling better to school. So that parent is sitting there with that choice of, oh, I can give the med, I can pray and hope that that headache's going to go away, but I also have to know and be stressed about the fact I might get a phone call later. I might be called away from work again. How am I going to do that? What's that going to look like? So I want to just emphasize that fact that having those extended release, that higher dose, and because it's so common now, not only in the adult world for extended release, so that's what we hear all the time, but also it's also within psychiatric and some of the more common psychiatric meds like extended release ADHD meds. So parents know that this is a thing, which is why they're so desperate for it within the pain world, because they know that the impact of that is huge. And then if you take that same kid and they're a 13-year-old, now you got a whole nother set of things, because the truth is you could be like, okay, 13-year-old could stay home by themselves and they should be in school and that's going to be better for that kid. But you know what? I could get a call in the middle of the day and I can't afford to miss work again. I'm getting in trouble with my boss. I can't afford to miss the hours. And so I might have to make the call to leave that kiddo at home so they can redose themselves in 4 to 6 hours and still be comfortable and okay. And I can't afford to miss work. So I want you to just really think about those scenarios that are playing out and that impact. So yes, there is the pain relief aspect, but there's a whole series of events happening around that kid that have a major implication on that child's life and that family's life that just need to be part of the consideration. Because getting kids in school and being there and functioning, being able to keep up with things is their primary job. That's what we want. We want kids to be where they need to be. And we want to be able to take those normal childhood injuries and make them tolerable enough so they can still function and engage in the way that they need to be. And it's clear that parents are desperately looking for that guidance, but they're not always going to have that provider actually available to them. So what we need to be delivering over the counter and in these medication options is the ability for them to function on their own to do that. So the thing we want to remember is all of these differences can cause stress. And we know that stress, as pain psychologist, really impacts those pain experiences. And if that kiddo goes to school knowing that that pain med's going to last through the whole day, their stress level is less, their experience is going to be better, their pain levels are going to go down, and their ability to engage goes up. So I also, before I leave you, and I'm so grateful for the time today, is one of the things that I often hear as someone who runs a nonprofit with kids in pain and who has done this for a long time is that people often underestimate the impact of our early childhood pain experiences. They're like, it's not a big deal. Kids get over it. But I just want to leave with the fact that and ponder and pause and reflect on the fact that those early pain experiences and how we're teaching kids how to deal with them and what they see and perceive as the options available to them, which is where over-the-counter meds really come in, has a huge impact not only on their experience now, but also on their experience and expectations moving forward. So what we do with those kiddos now definitely plays out in a really foundational way throughout the rest of their lives. So thank you so much for your time and energy, and thanks for your patience, and thanks everyone for their interest in this really important issue. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Jody. So our last speaker for session 1 will be Sally Greenberg. She is the Executive Director at the National Consumers League. Welcome, Sally.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I am the head of the National Consumers League. I am now the CEO, so I got a promotion. But we are really grateful for the opportunity to be here to talk about non-prescription drug development for pain and fever in children 2 to less than 12 years of age. Let me begin by saying just a few words about my organization. We feel that our job is really important because we are breaking down messaging for consumers to translate the important info that we think that they need to know. Our advice to parents is to read the package instructions carefully and check the active ingredients list whenever using an OTC medication. And I think it goes without saying, but I appreciate Leanne and Casey's comment that for many of the parents that we deal with, the names of drugs that roll off our tongue are confusing, and we need to be as clear as possible on the OTC labels and indicate to parents, always check in with your healthcare provider. The NCL has a very long-standing relationship with the FDA on matters of vaccine confidence, safe use of medication for kids, medication adherence, dietary supplements. One of the things that we tell parents is that the OTC medications should be treated as seriously as you would a prescription drug. NCL works to protect parents and young people under 12 years old. Our messaging for parents has consistently been, and more important than ever now, is the whole notion of vaccines and access to vaccines that are proven over many, many years, safe and effective to protect kids from many childhood illnesses, thus reducing the need for fever and pain medications. So we are going to be reiterating that message as we have done since our founding in 1899. And I personally have experience with the terrible illness of polio in my family, and our founder in the 1870s or 80s lost several siblings due to diphtheria, which has all but disappeared. You don't hear about diphtheria, and you really don't hear much about polio, but those of us who lived through it understand how devastating these diseases are. And so childhood vaccinations, we are going to be reiterating that message very strongly in the context of dealing with children's illnesses and reducing the need for some of these fever and pain medications. We also advise parents on safe storage of medications. Oh, am I supposed to be advancing the slides? That's my job? Okay. Sorry about that. There we go. We advise parents on safe storage and work for the 1972 Poison Prevention Packaging Act, which covers medications sold in special packaging. And despite the law, there are still tens of thousands of children that overdose each year because medications are left out and they get access to them. The technology used to prevent accidental ingestion has hardly changed for decades, unfortunately. So we want to get to work on that as well. The NCL also has programs that are national, Teen Financial Literacy and Education Program for teenagers, where students hold poster contests. Hundreds and hundreds of kids compete for who can explain what's on the OTC label most effectively. We have the older kids talking to the population that we're focused on here today, the 12 and unders. We have a Take with Care program that involves 5th and 6th graders where older teens are teaching are teaching younger students about over-the-counter medications, specifically acetaminophen, to prevent overdose. And we also launched in 2012 an acetaminophen awareness coalition, teaching kids, parents obviously critically important for the younger age group, but teaching teenagers, even young teens, about the potential for acetaminophen overdose and the consequential liver damage that can ensue from that. Acetaminophen, how it is used, preventing overdose, and what we can do to promote safe use. This is especially aimed at teens and tweens to ensure they know about the many OTC products that contain acetaminophen. We looked around at our database and the population of consumers that we deal with, and we hadn't seen an overwhelming demand for new, an overwhelming demand for pain and fever products coming from patients. We do know that in 2022, when the flu hit 4 to 8 weeks early, there was a shortage of Motrin for children and other drugs, and parents kind of went into a panic. The industry ramped up production, working with the FDA, thankfully, to meet increased demand. And we are in touch with the nurses and school nurses, and they are interested, I think as one of our panelists has mentioned, in longer-acting pain and fever medications to allow the kids to get through the school day without needing another dose. We also reached out to the pediatric rheumatologists, and one of the issues of concern there is the confusion on the dosing of Advil and Motrin and Tylenol, acetaminophen, and NSAIDs. It's confusing because the dosing timetables are can be from 4 to 6 hours for one drug, 4 hours for the other. The parents aren't sure when you administer the drug during that extra 2-hour period, so we could use some clarity there. And I know that's an area of real confusion for parents. I just want to mention 2 experiences that I had, and one of the reasons why we tell parents to treat OTC drugs just like prescription drugs. My son developed a very, very high fever when he was 9 or 10 months old, had a febrile seizure, which is an incredibly scary experience for a parent. I did not know that he had a super high fever, and I thought it was, I wasn't sure if he was going to live, but I've since learned that a febrile seizure is something that can be treated. I had just moved here to Washington. I did not have a pediatrician, and I was told to dose him with alternating Advil and Tylenol, and to put him in a lukewarm bath, which it turned out to be roseola. For those of you who have medical background or kids who develop it, you end up with, it looks like measles, but you end up with a lot of spots. But it was critical to have access to that information. I didn't really know much about it. It was a very scary moment. And in a more tragic case, one of my law school classmates' daughter had chickenpox, and she administered, this was in the 1970s, she gave her aspirin to bring down her fever, and she died of Reye syndrome. So when I say that we treat over-the-counter medicines just like we tell parents and consumers and patients to treat over-the-counter medicines just as they would prescription drugs, it's because of the really serious consequences in some cases, and hopefully there's much better awareness now about Reye syndrome and other complications that can arise from wrongly, which something we didn't know about in the 1970s. I think Reye wasn't in the headlines and parents were not aware of it. But you just being in touch with a healthcare provider who hopefully is up to date on all the possible negative consequences at times and all the information that you need to know, which is very confusing to parents. I want to mention one more issue. I know that we're talking about fever and pain, but there's also cough for kids, and many of us have wondered what to do about this persistent cough, which often comes with a fever, croup. And I think the cough medications and whether they're offered with pain and fever combinations, I think it's however we do it, I think we need to clarify, since it's a really common problem, croup, and the best thing to do is, as your healthcare provider will tell you, is to sit outside with your, even if it's freezing cold. Many was the night that I bundled my son up and myself up and sat outside for an hour so that they could breathe in the warm air. But your natural inclination is to want to offer them a cough medication, but those medications can also have acetaminophen in them, and parents need to know, need some clarity about what to provide kids with a cough, because that is a very scary condition. So if we can address those, I think that would be very helpful for parents, and if anyone needs to find us, we've got lots of information on our website, and we certainly are very grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you. Certainly grateful for all the work, the great work that the FDA does, the important work that you do, and we look forward to working even more closely with this agency in the coming several years, because we're the voice of medical science, and research is going to be more needed than ever. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you to all of our speakers for the informative presentations. You have all illustrated important personal and public health topics for our children and caregivers. Before we begin our first panel session, we will have a break. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so we will take a 15-minute break. And I will ask the panelists to go ahead and seat yourself at the panel table when you come in. So please all be reconvened for 11 o'clock for an early start for our panel. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll get started for our panel discussion. If our panelists would like to take their seats. All right. Good morning again. We'll get started. So, again, I'm Ndidi Nwokorie, and I will be co-moderating this portion of the workshop.
And my name is Aklil Getachew, and I'm a pediatrician by training, and I'll be co-moderating this with Ndidi. I'm a medical officer with the Division of Non-Prescription Drugs 1.
Thank you, Aklil. This session will focus on current consumer use of available non-prescription analgesic antipyretic drug products, as well as discuss potential areas where the current options are not fully addressing consumer needs for children ages 2 to less than 12 years of age. Our speakers from this morning will be joined by additional experts in this field to discuss this topic. I will now ask our additional panelists to briefly introduce themselves and state their affiliations. And let me start with Corey. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to skip you, John, if you want to introduce yourself.
No, not a problem. My name is John Alexander. I'm the Deputy Division Director for the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health in CEDAR at FDA.
Susan?
Hi, good morning. I'm Susan Sirota. I'm a primary care pediatrician in independent practice. I practice through a practice called Pediatrust. I'm the CEO. We're a large pediatric group practice without walls in the Chicago area. We span 19 locations and have 70 pediatricians in our group. I have a faculty appointment at Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine, where I also teach pediatrics to third-year medical students and am a continuity clinic attending for pediatric residents.
Sally?
Hi, I'm Sally Greenberg. I'm CEO of the National Consumers League. The views are our own, and we have no conflicts being here today. We raise money independently, and I'm glad to be with you.
And Samina, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. My name is Samina Ali. I am an emergency pediatrician at the Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm also a professor and pain researcher at the University of Alberta, and I'm studying specifically pain medications in children. And I'm also a mom to 3 and lived through at least 100 or more illnesses and injuries. So I bring that to the table as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So today we have two overarching questions that we hope would stimulate robust discussion during this session. For those in attendance, please come to the mic if you have any additional comments during the discussions or any questions that you would like to raise to our panelists. The questions we will be discussing will be projected for all to see. If we can have, there, it's projected, thank you. And so I will begin by first prefacing, as you've heard, that the label for current pediatric non-prescription pain and fever products states that the products are indicated for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains due to common cold, sore throat, flu, headache, toothache, and fever reduction. Non-prescription conditions and symptoms, as you know, are those that are self-limited, self-diagnosed, and recognized without a healthcare provider. So keeping this in mind, are there potential additional needs for both pain and fever over currently available acetaminophen and nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug products for children 2 to less than 12 years of age? And I wanted to start with Samina on our virtual panel to kick off our discussion.
Thank you so much for that. I think the very short answer is yes. We've heard from so many brilliant speakers this morning who have told us about the shortcomings as parents and as healthcare providers. From my perspective, having worked in the emergency department, pardon me, for children for over 2 decades, the most common things I hear families tell me, and that I've experienced myself as well, is that the medications don't last long enough, or they're having trouble getting the medications into their children. Now, in order to address those 2 things, I can think of a couple of possible solutions. One is thinking about extended release products so that our children sleep better, so that those who have non-infectious diseases or problems such as like headaches can get back to school for the day. That might be addressed by an extended release product, for instance. The other struggle that I encounter on a daily basis clinically in the emergency department is getting the medications into the children. Some children are very resistant to it, and that can be related to sort of their developmental stage, their age, and then there's some sensory and medical conditions that Jody had alluded to earlier that can also cause those problems to be worse for them. So are there other newer ways to deliver this medicine, both some of the ones that were presented in terms of gel caps or caplets that are stronger, but I'll put out an idea drawing from my work in, I do research in procedural sedation or making children sleepy and comfortable during medical procedures, is we use a lot of medicines that we spray in children's noses as a way to get medications into them when they can't take it orally and they're too old to accept it rectally or in the bum. So I will throw this out here as a wish list. Is that something that can be considered? Yeah, those would be the 2 thoughts that first come to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call our other panelists. Any would like to add to what Samina has added? Leanne?
So I guess I can start. I think we've heard clearly this morning about the interest in things that are longer lasting, and that could potentially include drugs that are given through extended release or developed with extended release of the existing medications, or we could be talking about additional options. I guess the concern there being that then how do you deal with the concerns about the confusion and the proliferation different drugs that are already available. But it does sound like that there's still the need for additional options. I guess I'm still interested in sort of understanding the need for additional options, and whether that represents additional options for treatment of pain or treatment of fever. There have been a couple of different speakers this morning that have talked about more so what I've heard about fever, but when it came to the subject of pain, there was some that it seemed were saying that maybe we don't need additional pain options, and other people who are saying it may be difficult to address. So I'd be interested in hearing some of the speakers.
Yeah. Ian?
Yeah, John, I think I can address a lot of that. I think to some extent the argument about, or the discussion about whether we need it for pain or fever is artificial, because the medications are used for both. Parents know that the same medicines are used for both, and certainly clinicians know they're used for both. So whether we label it, whether you label it or the FDA labels it for one or the other is really an artificial discussion because of the way it will be used in the real world. So if you had an extended release ibuprofen, for example, that was labeled for pain, everyone's going to know it's ibuprofen and you can use it for fever extended release. So I think we should be transparent about that. And as for need, I think you heard people wanting their children's pain relief to be through the school day. They want their children's pain to be relieved overnight. And if they have an ear infection, they want their fever to be controlled throughout the school day. So I think either one, the extended release. As for how much we need this, the current medications work really pretty well. This is not, on the scale of needing things, this is not like we need treatments for a global pandemic. It's not that emergency. But if we're seeing products for adults that are coming out, did we need a combination acetaminophen, ibuprofen for adults? Did we need it? Maybe, maybe not. But we're in an era where those things are evolving and they're becoming available. So if they're available for adults, the spirit of PREA would be the children should be offered the same opportunity. So I guess that's where I come down.
Yeah, Susan?
Yeah, I think a lot about what we heard from the consumer experts this morning. In many respects, in my own job, I'm doing consumer research every day because I'm hearing from the parents. They're sharing with us what frustrates them, what they need, and also what pleases them. And as I heard what Ian just said and what we heard this morning, it occurred to me a couple things. Yes, everyone knows these products work for both. And in many ways, it might be simplest if they were just labeled for fever or pain. But if we were to have products that lasted over an extended period of time, which I think extended release would be great. It's not just the school day, although that's important. We haven't talked about all the young females I see, for example, with menstrual cramps. It keeps them home from school, or they have to go to the nurse day after day for a week. But also that parents just want things that are immediate now. They want things taken care of. Individuals' distress tolerance is low as parents. And so if we had products that were extended release for treating pain and fever and these common conditions, I suspect that the short-acting products and the immediate release we have now would probably not sell. I can't imagine that many parents that wouldn't choose to have something that would help their child feel better for an extended period of time. They don't go into illness with a crystal ball, and they have no idea how long the pain will last or the fever. They're hoping not too long, so they don't have to come see us. But I think it's something that would be very important for consumers. And my patients, for sure. I've been asking people for several months, knowing this was coming.
Sally, did you?
Yeah, well, a question I think that would arise for a consumer is, are there dosing concerns with a longer acting product? Are we talking about higher doses of whatever medication we'd be using? Is there any risk to that? And are we talking about something that really bears very little concern or risk? And I asked the question of our pediatric experts here.
Okay, so I'm not going to answer your question because I don't necessarily know. But I did want to add that just back to what parents want, the longer acting, obviously, the longer acting in multiple forms, so not just the pill. Is there a chewable or a liquid that could do that? But also something that's more natural or organic. And I know we're making a drug, and so kind of inherently that is not, but all the added colors and flavors and dyes and whatever, can we get around that? Because so many people are moving that way with what they choose in their daily life. So those are some of the things that I would also think about in addition to just the longer lasting, but that I think was one of the more overwhelming things that we heard from our parents.
I'll take a stab at a couple of things. Just as far as the, with Sally's, I think it was Sally's question about the dosage and the amount for the day. I would expect that in the total daily dose would of the individual medications would be the same, but it would just be a formulation that lasted longer, so that the total daily dose is the same. But the medicines have pretty wide safety margin, which is why they're over the counter. As for the natural part, so I think today's discussion is limited to the existing molecules or the existing drugs that we have. I think the manufacturers would be better able to comment on how those are then formulated with other ingredients, dyes, preservatives, things like that, which I don't have the expertise to answer.
I guess I'll just add to that the use of different excipients might have specific purposes in certain instances, and others in terms of flavorings or dyes may be more in terms of the just the appearance and the recognition of the product. I think we'd all recognize if we saw Tylenol with that sort of reddish color that comes out, that is something that's probably related to the use of dyes that may be something that might, if somebody's looking for something that is free of dyes, could be reformulated in different ways. But then we start to get into then the panoply of different products that might be made available if what you're now talking about is wanting to have some, or some people pursuing some that are dye-free, other people pursuing something that they're familiar with already, others looking for sort of a gel cap, but we don't really have a lot of information necessarily about what the, or wouldn't be able to provide a lot of information in the packaging itself about what those components are inside of that and whether they're animal-derived, whether they're organic, whether they're free of sort of other unnatural additives, and I'm worried about being able to sort of have limited spectrum of different options, but enough that people are satisfied with what they have available to them.
Thank you, John. During our presentation, and specifically with our consumer representatives, we heard that we feel that consumers are interested in symptom-specific therapies out there. And so I would like to pose the question, not only to our consumer reps, but to anyone on the panel. I know we talked about the fact that these active ingredients are effective for both fever and pain, but would consumers still welcome a pain-only or a fever-only products? And if so, what would that population look like? Who are those in the population who will welcome a pain-only product, for example, or a fever-only product? Could you, from your perspective, speak to that? Leanne, we can start with you.
I mean, I think in that case, again, if you're looking, and here we're talking about just pain and fever, but if my kid can take a medication that's for what he has going on right now, as opposed to this extra medication, because that's what came in the medication that I could find on the shelf at 2 o'clock in the morning, or that's what I had in the house that was close enough. Like, I think that if you can have something very targeted to the actual problems that your kid is having, and so I think that the number of choices out there can be overwhelming, and I know we said everybody knows that, Advil or Tylenol treat pain and fever. I'm not convinced everybody does know that, right? And so I think that if you had something that was clearly marked for pain or clearly marked for fever, and even if it said both, maybe if there was an or in there, or it treats both, you don't have to worry. But I don't know. I think that there are some people who would really like to have only what they know they need as opposed to anything extra going on. So if you could just label it as this one is for pain, that would probably be good.
Thank you for that. Jody, I see your hand up. And do you mind introducing yourself as well? Or you're a speaker, sorry. Yes. Everybody knows you. Go ahead and speak.
Okay. You already had to hear from me. But yeah, I mean, to Leanne's point, I think that we as providers and in the medical world think about it from the medication standpoint, but consumers and patients think about it from the situation standpoint. They're coming in here just saying, my kid has this, I need it to be better. And we can see, and to Ian's excellent point, that yes, it can be sort of a moot point in that the medication is the same. But when we're trying to get parents, and one of our things with compliance and also not overdosing kids is we almost don't want to train also consumers to being like, well, it doesn't matter if this medication is for cough and fever and this, whatever, we just need to get something in their kid. We really do want them thinking about what are we treating and not dosing with them with something they don't want. And parents absolutely don't want that. And again, we want to be able to say, look, this is the one thing, and this is the one thing we're treating. And pain is a major issue. Like chronic pain is an issue, the daily stuff is an issue, and being able to sit here and say, we have this one product that addresses the one need I have is really, really important. And especially as I know, and we've been going through some of this of the potential things of like naproxen and different other medications that could be introduced, but that clarity of what this is for and being able to target that one thing, even when we know from a biochemical understanding the science behind it. But that's not typically how the average parent is approaching this. They want to be able to be as clean as possible in what they're giving to their child. And the most clear pathway to that. Because in a lot of ways, I mean, honestly, this is almost a design issue and how we're designing packaging and how we're designing that messaging. But the more we can think about this, I think situationally, because that's how the parents are approaching it, the better we can kind of clarify their best pathway.
Ian.
So I'm going to use my iPhone example. Imagine you told me I had to use one iPhone to make phone calls and another one to check the internet. I wouldn't like that. Okay, so that's so I'm a little surprised to hear, because we know that I would see patients buying the same medication and having to spend money twice for the same thing. That seems not consumer-friendly to me. I would rather tell the families, just like you use your phone, your smart device for phone calls and the internet, you can actually use this medication for both things. You don't have to buy two. They work for both things. That seems most consumer-friendly to me, so I'm a little surprised it seems like there's some education but maybe not everyone knows that acetaminophen works for pain and fever, but I think a lot of people do.
Oh, yeah.
So probably, I would think the majority do, and my clinical experience would suggest that. So I'd rather leave it as an educational topic rather than have patients spending money on two bottles of exactly the same thing that one says pain and one says fever.
John.
And I think that we may be mixing up a couple of different things, and certainly when you're talking about a single ingredient and one product, like this one contains acetaminophen or this one contains ibuprofen, and saying that one product is available and it treats pain, it also treats fever, makes sense in terms of having something and you know that one thing treats those things. And the issue that's being outlined about products that have multiple claims, but when it comes to multiple claims being addressed not by one product but by two or three different drugs that are in there, then the question becomes one of, well, do I really need the medicine that has this other added drug if my kid doesn't really have that symptom? And so I think that goes back to one of the messages that one of the presentations that talked about the idea of really having the education for parents to know, to sort of look at the list of ingredients and know that these things are doing different things. So if you really have a child who doesn't have that one symptom, and you've got a medicine that's inside of this specifically to address that symptom, then maybe this isn't the medicine that you need. What you need is the single product.
Diane, please.
And I think to add on to John's comment, when we look at the cough and cold industry or market, it's very different than thinking about a combination or a Tylenol or acetaminophen only product for pain and one for fever, because the combination products that are for colds have different medications that have different functions within those products. If we're talking about having a pain-only product or a fever-only product that contains either acetaminophen or ibuprofen or a combination of those things, to Ian's point, we know that both of those drugs work for both of those conditions. And the one concern I would have about having an acetaminophen pain-only and acetaminophen fever-only would be that parents would, oh, my kid has fever and pain, so now I'll buy two of them and give both of them, which means they're going to get more acetaminophen or ibuprofen than they should. And I agree with Ian's point about the number of packages, the price point for all of these things. And as a prior pharmacy owner in my past career, there's only so much space on the shelves. And so you add all of these new SKUs, it becomes an issue for the people that are stocking the shelves. But I do think that labeling and understanding the labeling, and I loved what Sally had to say about teaching people to read labels and get the pertinent information off of them, because that's also going to prevent a lot of the errors that might happen or do happen with medications, even those that currently exist.
Yeah, so I do agree with that, and I don't know that I need one thing that says pain and one thing that says fever if they're exactly the same thing, right? But I think a lot of this does go back, I think, to what Judy said, where as a parent, you're thinking about it as the symptoms my kid has, not as the acetaminophen, naproxen, ibuprofen, whatever. And I think that when you think about labeling, it's not just like necessarily the active ingredient on the back, because I can be very confused as to whether I need ibuprofen or Tylenol or whatever at this stage, right? Which one's better? I really have no idea, and the active ingredients are different, and I just don't know. But I think you can think about, if you thought about labeling from a parent perspective, something that's easy to where you can't overdose, like, part of me thinks about Garanimals. Who remembers Garanimals, right? Like, you have a shirt with a giraffe, and it's going to match all of the pants with a giraffe, but you don't want to put the whale with the shark. So, but I could think, like, you could have some really standard, basic labeling out there that makes it super clear that you can take these three together, and it'll cover these symptoms, or you can take this one and this one, but definitely don't take this one with these guys. Like, it seems like, I mean, this may be an exercise in marketing, right, and understanding the consumer and what they really understand, as opposed to all the technical terminology that maybe some consumers don't know.
I think Jody, and then after Jody, Samina have something to say.
Yeah, just to clarify my comments, because Anna would say that I agree with you that would parents want a pain only or fever only? Yes. But the fact that it doesn't exist becomes really that issue of education. And to Leanne's point of like just being able to clarify. And this is where like the and cough and cold and all of that has made that more confusing, because they don't necessarily understand that. So I just want to clarify that. Again, when the question was, do we want it to exist? Yes. The fact that it doesn't currently would be to that point of education. So they're not buying multiple products and they're not confusing that, but really coming at that from that situational standpoint. And I loved Geranimals reference because that's amazing.
Thank you. Samina?
Thank you. Building on the great points that have just been made, I had not previously considered what Jody had brought up, that, you know, I was thinking of it from a medical practitioner point of view. I want to keep it safe and simple. And when you flip it around and say, yes, but when it's 2 a.m. and I'm exhausted and I'm not sure I'm choosing the right product in that shelf of 50 or 60 products, I see the wisdom in that. I do agree, however, with what many people have said is the application of Occam's razor, right? Which I'm a big fan of, which is if there's multiple possible answers or solutions, choose the simplest one. So rather than creating multiple different packagings to say, this is for fever, this is for pain, what if we focused on simplifying our packaging, and efforts were directed towards public health education and health literacy, which is the public's capacity to understand health information. And then we can safely, I imagine this incredible world where at 2 a.m, I'm standing at that pharmacy and there's two options, acetaminophen and ibuprofen, and there's a sign that says these work for both fever and pain. You can use either of these to help your child, and perhaps as our evidence and our research evolves, it might even be able to tell us which one is better for which scenario, because there's more and more evidence emerging around ibuprofen and acute musculoskeletal injuries like fractures and sprains, that is the better choice. So again, Occam's razor. Let's not complicate things for our already exhausted families. And I do really worry about the double dosing and misdosing that's been mentioned, because that is a very real thing that I see in the emergency department, where people come in having given the doses either too high dose or too many, too frequent in dosing.
Thank you. So moving on, I think that was really a good discussion on developing the products for symptom-based. I do want to ask an additional question regarding the options that we have. Currently, we have acetaminophen and we have NSAID, but the NSAID that is currently marketed is ibuprofen. What does the panel think about additional NSAID products marketed for this population of, and I think some of the presenters alluded to it, namely naproxen, which we have a long-standing understanding of the safety and effectiveness of in those 12 and older in the non-prescription space. I'd like to hear from our panelists your thought about developing additional NSAID products for this population for the non-prescription aid space. And I'm going to start with, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but Corey, I'd like to hear your perspective with your experience with pain management.
Yeah, so I think as far as developing an naproxen, and especially in the longer acting aspects of that, I think there is great utility in getting more evidence in that younger population, that we would be able to do more, just because they mentioned the rheumatologic population and some of these really challenging to treat pain populations, where then maybe we can take out some of the discrepancies around the pain and fever and those kind of things, and then you're a pain-only product. So I think there's great utility, but I'd love to hear from the panel.
Other thoughts? Diane, did you?
I would definitely agree with Corey's perspective on that. We know that oftentimes naproxen is used in kiddos who have headaches, even if they are under 12, and the fact that it can be dosed Q8 to Q12 is helpful and would get most kids through their school day.
Susan, did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to support that. In the outpatient primary care setting, so not the urgent setting, or not necessarily the place where maybe some kids had where they don't have a medical home, but about 1 in 5 of the patients we see have some sort of chronic pain, and it's not necessarily part of a chronic complex condition. It may be knee pain, it may be headaches, and to be able to stay in the school day, feel better, and have the psychological well-being that brings, it can really change the trajectory for a child. I see children over time in continuity, and pain is disabling, and having a way to do that with something that is perhaps more effective, but if nothing else, just longer acting, would make a very big difference, not just day to day, but the overall well-being of that individual.
I'll just say I agree that if you can come up with something that meets some of these other criteria that we'd like the longer day, or maybe it is just for pain instead of fever too, I think that would be super helpful. I think figuring out how to label things so we don't think of it the same, like if it is different, and I'm not a doctor so I don't know, but if it is different than ibuprofen or Tylenol, how do you explain that to me as a consumer so that I know that I'm picking the right one for my kid? So again, just the education and the labeling piece in clear terms.
Yeah, Diane, please.
I wanted to add one more comment, just based on the fact that in the U.S. we do have the combined acetaminophen and ibuprofen product that is not recommended for kiddos under 12, but having research done on that might enable us, because we don't really even know if that means that the product in combination lasts longer than it would if we just gave each one separately. So there may be an opportunity to even extend that to the younger age population if we had proper research that would support that it lasts longer and is safe.
Perfect segue to our next question.
All right.
So
Can I add one more comment? So
Go ahead, Leanne.
we do have some very savvy parents out there too, and they want things that have been tested on kids to really understand how they work in kids. So, to make sure that it does go through all the proper testing to know how it reacts in a kid who's 4 or 8 as opposed to that 12 or older group.
Thank you.
Can I return to one issue that we raised briefly? I think Ian raised it, and that is cost to parents. I think we should be aware, and I'd be interested in our pediatrician panelists, we should be aware that not every parent has $5, $10, $15 to go out and buy these medications. There are generic versions. I'm looking on the Amazon site. They're not cheap either. They're, $5, $6. And the brand names are $8 and $9. So I'm curious to know whether you advise patients about getting the generic alternatives, and whether we do focus a lot at my organization and consumer organizations in general about the importance of patients and parents in this case, and young people understanding what the generic means for OTC and how it has been very carefully vetted and tested by the FDA. But that's an area of confusion. So I do notice a significant price difference in the generic versus the brand version. And the ibuprofen version I'm looking at says it treats both fever and pain. So that would seem to be a good product, but I was curious about the discussions you have with patients about, for cost purposes, about the generic versus the brand.
Diane, did you want to?
Yes, I was going to just comment on that as well. The one thing that a lot of parents may not know and a lot of physicians may also not know is the lower socioeconomic categories. Most states' Medicaid programs will cover the over-the-counter acetaminophen and ibuprofen products. And so that would be another consideration in terms of adding combination products or new products to try to make sure that those are considerations for coverage on health insurance plans where kids don't have parents that have the financial means to pay for various of these things.
Thank you. I think those are very important issues. And
we still have many states that have not adopted Medicaid. And those are some of the more, as you all know, I'm sure, more the socioeconomically challenged communities. So that's an important thought, but we should be cognizant that not everybody has access to Medicaid.
And I'd say we can work on the education, too, from an ER standpoint to write prescriptions for those, because then it is, a lot of the times, the counters are covered by a lot of the insurances, and then really picking what the family's using at home and trying to think of that when I'm discharging them at 3 a.m. Is it something that they're going home for, or given the other product that they don't have at home, to try to help with that? Because I'd love your thoughts on the pediatric aspect of that question as well.
thank you very much, Sally, for bringing that up. And although that is a very important aspect of healthcare, this workshop does not really focus on that, and so we can't really talk more in detail as to how to manage that. But that is a very important aspect of healthcare, and thank you for raising that concern. I am going to turn over to Akil for our second question.
Yep. So we've already been sort of nipping at the butt of this question. So our second question, and push the panel session to question 2. So our second question has to do with a combination products that's already been mentioned with acetaminophen and NSAID versus single ingredients. And the question we'd like to ask is there a benefit to developing these single ingredient products in a combination to treat pain and fever? To think about it also as pain alone and fever alone. And I'd like to have Dr. Paul start.
Well, I think I already commented on this issue that I think most clinicians and many, if not most, parents already know that those acetaminophen and ibuprofen can be used for pain and fever. So it would seem strange to me to develop a product that contained in combination those ingredients and not have both indications. I will say that however, if we extend this to naproxen, I'm not aware of pediatric data on naproxen for fever. Perhaps it's there, but I haven't reviewed it. I'm not sure that even clinicians think about naproxen for fever, but they do think about it for pain. In adults, I'm not aware that people think about it for fever. So I guess that's a caveat for me, is that if you're talking about a combination product of naproxen and acetaminophen, for example, maybe that's a pain-only product, though I still would wonder, well, what does it do for fever? As a academic, researcher, but I guess maybe there's some gray area there for me.
Good point, Ian, for sure. I've never seen that literature either. Prior to this symposium, I really was not in favor of the combination of acetaminophen and ibuprofen, but And the paucity of literature, as I pointed out, doesn't really inform the pediatric population well. But after reading the Italian study and the fact that they supported it, it gave me better consideration, especially if you've got the right ratio of acetaminophen and ibuprofen for the age range that we would be treating, because then parents only have to measure out one dose of whatever medicine. They only have to give one tablet or whatever, so that they're less likely to make errors. Now, we don't really have good research that suggests it works better, it works longer, or it's safer at this point. But I think for those reasons, it does make sense that this could be an area that we could look at as long as appropriate research is done on the efficacy, the safety, and addressing some of the issues.
Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, two comments. First, I wanted to comment on pain only. So I am part of a large network of pediatricians who do what I do through the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's about 1,500 pediatricians. We have an active listserv, 49 states, 3 U.S. territories. It's a very good representation of pediatricians. And I pose this question in anticipation of this workshop. And it turns out, just as parents are concerned about safety, primary care pediatricians could not get to the point of considering what would a pain-only product look like, because there's so much concern for safety and so much concern for confusion around labeling. And to the point of confusion with labeling, one of my colleagues, which I thought was a great idea, went so far as to suggest that he had always felt there should be color coding. We shouldn't depend on people's literacy or their health literacy, and we should just say, you know, fever's this color in pediatrics and pain is this color, and if those two colors are on the label, that product does that. I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to share that. But to the point of combination, I would very much, in light of what I do day to day, favor a combination product, and I agree with Diane's comments. The more I read about it, the more I think worth considering, because unbeknownst to many pediatricians, our patients are combining products. They are alternating. We as a practice don't recommend that practice of alternating or combining, yet our patients end up in emergency rooms, they end up in urgent cares where we don't have control over the messaging that they're getting. And then, of course, the biggest messaging in many respects is coming from social media and parents groups and non-physicians giving advice. And so if it's going to happen, it's our preference that it be safe and effective. And so I think the way to do that is to give people what it looks like they're looking for, but give that in a way where we have not just efficacy, but the confidence of everyone, the consumer and the physician who cares for that child, that safety is not a concern, because that is just the biggest concern when I pose these questions to my colleagues to gain information for today.
I guess one comment that I would make in terms of thinking about the combination of the medications is the idea that you'd want the combination or the medicines together to be providing some added benefit in some way, that it would either be more effective at reducing fever for a longer period of time, for something along those lines. My understanding of at least what exists, or looking at the literature with regards to the combination of these two products, more of it is focused on sort of alternating regimens of these things, which I don't think would be available in a product that's intended or given as a single pill to contain the combination of both. Though I understand what you were saying, Ian, about there are some studies that the study that you did about looking at the combination of both, but it didn't seem like the combination was providing any added benefit in terms of either more effective treatment of fever or better or longer duration of action than each of the products singly could provide. And that may be part of where there are sort of limits of what we can do with the existing products that we have.
So I'll just speak for my study. So the combination was better than ibuprofen alone, okay? And I think there are a few other studies that have done this, not many, that have similar findings. So there are some pediatric data, including small sample size, but what I did that says combination better than single for fever. We also have adult data showing that combination for pain is better than single product for pain. So I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it is worth going the next step and pursuing it further for children, more participants, other outcome, different outcomes. Pain is going to be hard to study in 2 to 6 year olds. We actually, in unpublished, in the study I did, we tried to do pain as well, and that didn't work very well. So we didn't. This was a pre-clinicaltrials.gov, so we didn't register. We didn't have to register the outcome, but it was hard. It was hard for us to study that. But you could look at things like sleep or readministration of medications during the school day. There are other pediatric outcomes that could be studied that could help with the pain indication.
I have a question, just a follow-up question regarding the combination drugs. Is there any specific OTC population you think of that may benefit from this more than the other? Like, can you think of different age groups, like the 6 to 12 differently than the 2 to 6? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I would wonder whether, and even the current labeling that doesn't include minor injuries, I would wonder if a sports-related injury or a minor musculoskeletal injury in kiddos that were not 1 or 2, but kiddos that were more likely to be able to describe their pain more effectively. So maybe 6 to 12 would be reasonable.
Susan?
I would agree with that. It's also the age group where we see a tremendous amount of overuse pain. So this crazy sports specialization at a young age that happens in pediatrics now is a population that has periodic and recurrent pains that are not related to fever or illness and are pain that kids endure throughout their day-to-day and their usual activities. So I would agree with that age group, and I would have that particular population in mind too.
I just want to think about, this kind of goes back to where we were saying that acetaminophen is good for pain and fever. And you just said this combination is better, but I don't know what better means. Is it better at controlling pain? Is it better at making it do it longer? Is fever still included in this? And so one thing I would think about is, well, if I hear as a parent that acetaminophen and ibuprofen together are better, then am I going to buy the one that's the combo, or am I going to buy, I have both on hand and now I give both to my kid and now you're doing higher dosing when you don't want to? I don't know. The whole thing seems very confusing to me, but if you told me why it was better and in what situation I would use it instead, then I think that would be good.
When my kids went to school, preschool, with a non-contagious febrile illness that included runny nose and cough, but it was non-contagious, I would give them both medications, and they would make before they went to school, because they were less likely to have a fever during the school day, and they have less discomfort during the school day. Does that answer your?
And does it mean it lasts longer too? Or?
So yeah, and so if you looked at the data that I presented, at 6 hours, the ibuprofen group was, the average temperature was in the febrile range, whereas the combination was not in the febrile range, and that was statistically highly significant in addition to clinically significant, statistically highly significant, even comparing just the temperatures at 6 hours.
Diane.
And I think, too, both comments, I think part of the problem is we don't have consistently defined research for a lot of these things, which is why if we were going to suggest making new products available, whether they're long-acting, extended release, whatever forms, whether they're combined, I think it's really critical that this research occurs and is very clearly outlined so that when it's done, everybody understands the outcomes that we were trying to achieve, whether we did or not. Personally, one of the downsides I see about giving two medications is if one will do the job, why give two? Because you're increasing the risk of side effects, as an example. But if the properly done research tells us that there were no statistically significant differences in adverse effects, then it supports the fact that we're doing that. And I think I did mention during my presentation that the Italian product has a different ratio of acetaminophen and ibuprofen to what even the adult product has in the U.S. So trying to figure out what that right mix is, especially when we're dosing kids on a milligram per kilo basis, to make sure that we're getting the right dose.
There have been combination products that have been available for kids before, or there was Combiflam that was used in India, made by Aventis. 20 years ago, it was available. I don't know if it still is, but Combiflam was the name of the product. So you did ask the question about the age group.
I did.
So I wanted to, yeah. So
yes, thank you.
I do have the 2 to 5, 6 to 12 is a little. I'm not sure that's. I think more about the verbal abilities to explain symptoms, and clearly the 2 and 3-year-old is much different than the 10 to 12-year-old in being able to explain how they're feeling. So I don't know where the right cutoff is, but 2 and 3-year-olds I think of much differently developmentally in speech and language development than 10, 11, 12-year-olds. So
just to follow up, with that in mind, are you more concerned with the ability to then evaluate the pain in that age group because they can't effectively communicate where the pain is and the effect? Or are you worried about the utility of these products if developed in that population at home?
Yeah, I'm not so worried about the utility, but it is more difficult to study those outcomes. The pain outcomes are, right. The younger you get, the more challenging it is for that pain to get the solid evidence that you want for pain. You have to rely on other heart rate and other sort of other less more observation rather than a self-report by the child. So.
Yeah, I'd love, as a pain researcher, I'd love to kick it over to Samina, who I know has lots of thoughts, having done outcome studies looking at our pain scores and those kind of things. So Samina, I see your hands up.
Thanks so much. It is absolutely, the younger child gets more challenging to assess their pain, but it can absolutely be done. If anyone, as we move this concept forward into action, needs any consultation for how to measure that, I'm very happy to share resources I have. Dr. Thomas as well, expert in interacting with children and understanding how to assess their pain. We have their parents who are experts at assessing their children and scales as well. So it can be done. I do still have a fear as we talk about developing more products in particular related to fever, that we're perpetuating some myths here. So fever is not bad. We know this. The lack of sleep, the lack of feeding, the lack of eating that it causes is a problem. Absolutely. So I think we need to be a little bit careful that if we're developing combination products or stronger products or longer acting products to address fever specifically, that we don't inadvertently perpetuate a myth that fever needs to be brought down. Because it's not the fever that's the problem. It's the I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I hate everybody, I only want to sleep on my mother or father or parent sitting up for the next 4 days. That's the problem, right? And then when we look at the pain side of things, we need to always remember, and again, this goes back to a little bit of health literacy focus rather than product development, but medicine is not always the answer. There are so many other things we need to be educating families that can be done psychologically and physically to help children with pain before we layer our pharmacologic or drug therapies on top of that. So I think there's a lot of education before we do a deep dive into making, putting our efforts into combination or stronger products.
Before I go to Jody, John, did you have a question? Okay, Jody, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention echo Samina's comment. Yeah, it is harder, but it is definitely possible. And that's definitely a field as a pain researcher. We've done that. We don't want to not study a group because it's more challenging, because these are the kids who are potentially suffering, and certainly there's the expertise out there. And as the very good suggestions for research. The other thing I just wanted to mention was completely horrifying to me, but I think a factor in the public education and knowledge is the number one source of health information for parents under 35 now is TikTok. And so really that, when you mentioned earlier the power of social media and that influence, it's just not something we can ignore. That's where a lot of the public is getting their information. And as we know, a lot of terrible information, which challenges us to be even more clear on the right information getting out there and how we make that as clear as possible. It's always a not so fun fact, as I would say to my team, that has to be in the mix as well.
I just want to I completely agree with Samina's comment that normothermia is not the therapeutic goal. With that said, when your child has to come home from school and you have to miss work because of the number on the thermometer, normothermia becomes the family's goal. So we have to balance what we're, these two realities that it's absolutely true. We're trying to treat symptoms other than fever, although most people with a temp of 39 or above are going to feel lousy. But recognize the realities that families face, that they can't go to school. Somebody's got to stay home with them when they've got a fever.
And I'll join the discussion to say that you are told not to send your child to school with a fever, even a treated fever. And I experienced a super high fever, spiked fever. And when we say fevers are not the problem, I would not recommend any parent have to experience a febrile seizure. And I, as a fairly new parent, did not know what was happening, didn't have a thermometer nearby, and my son's fever had gone to 105, and that's a very scary experience. So I would say we do need to treat fevers, and I speak as a non-medical person, but we need parents to have thermometers handy and to know what's going on and raise awareness about the risk of having a fever spike really high, and the febrile seizure experience is a terrible experience that I would not wish on any other parent, even though it turns out it's not a deadly situation. You don't really know that as a parent, and it is a scary, very scary outcome.
And certainly we recognize that there are those parents who have had that experience that then become hyper-aware, but that's the whole idea here about the understanding the balance of what we're doing. The purpose of these medications is not to prevent febrile seizures in everybody. It's not to pursue normothermia as a goal, but the idea is this something that's going to provide added comfort to the child so that they're able to sleep, they're able to rest, they're able to participate in whatever activities that they would need to do, and making them more comfortable is the goal. You pointed out the idea of controlling fever, but I also have had the experience of the kid who's feeling very hot but still sleeping comfortably, and you don't wake that child up to give them the medicine either.
Are there any additional comments or any questions? No comments. All right. So with that, we're going to break for lunch, and just wanted to, again, extend our gratitude for our panelists, and thank you for making this a very interesting and valuable discussion. We look forward to the discussion later on this afternoon, and I'm going to request that everyone return here by 1 p.m. Lunch will be between 12:15 and 1, and if we can get here a little before 1 so we can start right on time.